Order. We start with questions to the Secretary of State for Scotland, Alex Barros-Curtis.
Speaker, question number 1, please.
State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure everyone across the House would like to join me in paying tribute to the late, great Denis Law, a hero to many Scots and particularly football fans. The lawman himself scored 30 international goals in 55 appearances for Scotland and the only Scot to win the Ballon d'Or. Our sincere condolences to his family, friends and former colleagues. I also wish to wish everyone a very happy Burns Day for Saturday. We celebrated with 2 fantastic events in the Scotland office this week, and I was very pleased that so many members from across the House were able to join us. And I also just would like to register it's Holocaust Memorial Day next week, Mr. Speaker, and on the 80th anniversary we all reaffirm in this House that we will never ever forget. Mr. Speaker, our economic plan for change will bring growth and economic opportunity to all parts of the country, and I am so proud that in the last 6 months we have brought GB Energy to Scotland, secured the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow, launched Brand Scotland, delivered a pay rise for hundreds of thousands of Scottish workers, increased the state pension by our commitment to the triple lock, and we have promised in our manifesto to end austerity, and with £4.9 billion extra for the Scottish Government, promise delivered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I thank my right honourable friend for that and associate myself with the comments he made. Further to what he's just said, can he assure me that after 14 years of obstruction from the party opposite, this UK Labour government will work with our Scottish and Welsh colleagues in order to deliver the change that the country voted for as part of a whole UK approach?
Thank you for the question. Unfortunately, the previous government left office with living standards at the lowest level since the 1950s. In contrast, we are determined to deliver economic growth and raising living standards in every part of the United Kingdom, so working people have more money in their pockets. I meet with the Deputy First Minister regularly to go over the issues that are joint for both governments to deliver for the people of Scotland.
Wishart.
Surely the best way for them to strengthen their union is for the UK and Scottish governments to work together on issues that need pressing attention, issues like immigration and demography. 20 years ago, there was a Fresh Talent Initiative. Today, the First Minister is going to launch his graduate plans to get graduates from all over the world to come to Scotland. Will he encourage the Home Office to work with the Scottish Government to achieve this?
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, we have reset the relationship with the Scottish Government. I think I spend more time with the Deputy First Minister than the honourable gentleman does himself. I suspect he should spend more time with his own side discussing issues that are of interest to the Scottish people. We are determined to deliver. We will do that in partnership, and that is what resetting the relationship is all about.
Patricia Ferguson, Chair of the Select.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank my right honourable friend for helping to secure £14 million of levelling up funds for the area of Drumchapel in my constituency of Glasgow West. And can I ask him if he agrees with me that, given the record settlement that the Scottish Government has now received from the UK Government, that it's about time the Scottish Government went ahead and sorted out the problems of under-provision and overcrowding in Drumchapel Health Centre?
Thank you for that question. And indeed, the Honourable Lady herself has been a doughty champion for Drumchapel and was the key at the heart of this Labour Government of getting that funding across the line, Mr. Speaker. The health service in Scotland is in crisis, only to be seen by the First Minister taking personal control of the health service in Scotland. 1 in 6 of our fellow Scots are on an NHS waiting list. That record settlement of £4.9 billion to end austerity in Scotland needs to be spent on the front line in places like Drumchapel Health Centre.
Carla, Lockhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister has spoken eloquently about his efforts to strengthen the union that exists between our nations. What then is he doing to fix the problem that the Windsor Framework and Protocol is having on importing seed and ware potatoes from Scotland into Northern Ireland? That's not strengthening our union.
Mr. Speaker, this government is fixing the foundations of our economy and resetting our relationships not just with the devolved administrations but also with our partners across the European Union. I would hope that all parties would want to come together to make sure that happens.
Question 2, Mr. Speaker. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State meets with the Deputy First Minister on a regular basis, and the Interministerial Group on Environment, Food and Rural Affairs convenes regularly to discuss important issues, including agriculture. I am personally looking forward to speaking at the NFU Scotland Conference in February alongside Scottish Government ministers. We've been working hard to positively reset relations with the Scottish Government. The recent budget saw Scotland receive an above-population share for agriculture, and ring-fencing of the budget was removed in order to respect the devolution settlement.
Chamberlain.
Speaker, I look forward to hearing the Minister at the NFUS dinner. But can I ask the Minister what conversations she's had with the Scottish Government and indeed the Treasury in relation to the APR reforms and their impact on tenant farmers? My understanding from the questions I've asked is they do not have the same opportunities to ameliorate the APR changes as others do, and it feels that this cohort have been completely forgotten by the Government. Can we urgently review that if that is indeed the case?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. These reforms still provide a very significant level of tax relief, with the first million of combined business and agriculture assets continuing to receive 100% relief in most cases. Additional assets will still receive relief at a rate of 50%. The budget was designed to protect the payslips of working people while raising a record funding for public services in Scotland, and the Honourable Lady should outline where she thinks that money should come from if she thinks that the wealthiest landowners shouldn't be paying more tax.
Euan Stainbank.
Mr Speaker, inheritance tax is a necessary tax. This is a view tacitly shared by the benches opposite, considering they didn't lift a finger to abolish it when in power. The ministers agree that taxing the most valuable farm estates half the rate other inheritance taxpayers pay is an essential step to enable record spending on sustainable farming and deliver record high budget settlements for Scotland. And if the opposite benches disagree, they should go back to their constituencies this weekend and explain what they would cut, rather than waiting until halfway through the fiscal year like the Scottish Government are prone to do.
I couldn't agree more, Mr Speaker. The members opposite have told us about how they want to see the benefits of the budget but are not prepared to support any of the tax-raising measures inside it. This budget secured billions for Scotland, but the SNP voted against it. It delivered a pay rise for 200,000 of the lowest paid Scots. The SNP voted against that. And it ended Tory austerity. The SNP voted against that.
Shadow Secretary of State Andrew Buck.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Can I associate myself and indeed the official opposition with Secretary of State's comments regarding Dennis Law, a proud son of Aberdeen who never forgot his hometown and indeed whose legacy lives on through the Dennis Law Trust, which does such good work with young people in and around the city. Now, Mr Speaker, this Saturday the National Farmers Union of Scotland are planning a national day of action in protest at the pernicious, ill-thought-through and destructive changes to agricultural property relief and its threat to the future of family farms in Scotland. I will be attending the local rally in Aberdeenshire to show my and my party's support of our farmers, and I noticed that the Edinburgh rally is taking place but a few miles from the Secretary of State's own constituency, Ingleston. So does the Minister know whether or not the Secretary of State will be attending the rally?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, we're in ongoing discussion with the National Farmers Union of Scotland. As I say, I'm proactively attending their conference next month. I'm slightly surprised to hear the member opposite talking about the changes in the budget and not welcoming the announcements and the implications that they've had, such that the IMF and OECD both predict Britain will be Europe's fastest growing economy in the coming years. The UK is the only G7 economy, apart from the US, to have had its growth forecast upgraded by the IMF for this year, and the UK has come ahead of Germany, China and India to become the second most attractive country for global investment, trailing only the US, according to PwC's annual survey. If he wants to talk about...
Question. Order. Minister, please. Andrew.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, of course we don't agree with the policy in the budget. This policy is pure wrong. Farmers were not consulted. Indeed, they were misled by his party, their party, when they were told this would not happen. It will lead to the demise of the family farm and undermine our food securities, as farmers will simply stop farming. The concern, the worry and the fear that these changes have wrought on Scotland's farmers are real and are on them and their government. So if the Secretary of State will not attend this weekend, will he at least use his position, and will she use her position as Scotland's man and woman at the Cabinet table to urge their colleagues to do as the NFU ask: stop, reset, reflect and properly engage on and consult on an alternative approach and stop this change?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, as the honourable member is perfectly aware, the majority of estates will not be affected. We're in ongoing conversation with the National Farmers Union of Scotland. We've asked them to come forward with some worked examples of estates that may be impacted. They haven't done so yet, but of course will be an ongoing conversation. But the majority of estates will not be affected.
Kirsty.
Thank you. Question 3, Mr Speaker.
State.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Promoting Scotland internationally is one of my 4 priorities. Brand Scotland, the Scotland Office programme of international trade and investment promotion, is about selling Scotland to the world. We've been to Norway, Singapore and Malaysia. We plan to be in the US in April. It's an initiative for the whole of government. We work closely with DBT and FCDO colleagues in particular. Additionally, I have met many foreign ambassadors and high commissioners in the last few months, and this week hosted members of the diplomatic corps at Dover House to discuss Scotland's offer to the world.
Welcome back. Christine Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tech companies like Calnex in my constituency of Bathgate and Linlithgow export around the world, including to the US and Southeast Asia. Considering his recent visit to Southeast Asia, can the Secretary of State update the House on what representations he made on his November trip to promote Brand Scotland, specifically in the tech sector, and will he join me to visit Calnex and hear about the vital work they do to support digital infrastructure?
Stay.
Mr. Speaker, can I just start by paying tribute to the Honourable Lady and how consistently she raises interests of her own constituency in this House in the fashion and the manner in which she does so. Technology, of course, was a key theme of my recent visit to Malaysia and Singapore, and I had productive meetings with ministers from both governments and major companies in the region to discuss how Scotland can share its world-leading technological expertise with both countries. I would encourage Calmex to engage with the Scotland Office and the National Wealth Fund, and please write to me if the Honourable Lady would, and we can make the relevant introductions to the company.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When President Trump visited Scotland during his first presidency, I was tasked with officially welcoming him, and the details of that will appear in my memoirs. But whilst we may disagree with President Trump on many specific issues, it is clear that he has a deep affection for Scotland, with the birth of his mother on the Isle of Lewis and his huge investment in Scottish golf at Turnberry and the North East. So what will the Secretary of State for Scotland do to encourage economic benefit during the Trump second presidency?
Thank you to the right honourable gentleman. Yes, the President does have a deep affection for Scotland. He also had a deep affection for the right honourable gentleman, I'm sure, and I hope that appears in his memoirs. I'm sure there'll be some rare unsigned copies for people to buy when it's published. The Prime Minister has been clear with the Foreign Secretary, who have met President Trump and have been working very closely with the transition team. Of course, Scotland is a key marketplace in terms of the USA, and it's not in anybody's interest, whether it be here in the United Kingdom or indeed in America, for tariffs to be put on Scottish goods, and we're working very closely with both the government here and, of course, the government in America to make sure that doesn't happen.
Martin Rhodes.
Question 4, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our plan for change will benefit workers in Scotland more than most. More than 100,000 workers in Scotland on zero-hours contracts could benefit from the Employment Rights Bill. This bill will have significant benefits for workers in insecure and low-paid jobs, and Central Scotland is one area where these workers will stand to benefit the most.
Mr. Speaker, in 2023, the Low Pay Commission estimated that approximately 13,500 employees who lived in Glasgow were paid at or below the relevant minimum wage, 4.8% of all employees living in the city. What assessment has the Minister made of the impact of the government's Make Work Pay initiative for those workers and others in Scotland?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The increase to the national minimum wage is delivering on our commitment from day one of government. Work should always pay. Modernising the UK labour market, including extra pay and secure jobs, is at the heart of rebuilding our economy and will help us achieve our plan for long-term national renewal and growth. In addition to over 13,000 workers in Glasgow, as the honourable member mentioned, national minimum wage increases will benefit workers across Scotland, with over 4,000 in Dundee City, 4,400 in the Highlands and 2,900 in the Scottish border set to benefit, to name just a few.
Ashley Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government's Employment Rights Bill will increase costs on small and medium-sized enterprises by £5 billion a year. It will make it easier to strike. It will make it easier for employees to sue their employers. Combined with the tax rises announced in the budget, isn't it inevitable that this Labour government will increase unemployment?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable gentleman might not be aware that unemployment has actually come down in Scotland this week, and we have promised there will be no return to austerity, and the workers' pay slips across Scotland were indeed protected by that budget. More than half of employees will either see a cut or no change in their national insurance bills. The smallest businesses and charities are protected, and increasing that employer national insurance decision that we made will raise more than £25 billion to help rebuild Britain.
Richard Ford.
5, please, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am in regular contact with ministerial colleagues from DESNES on a range of issues relevant to clean energy production in Scotland. Scotland is key to the UK Government's clean power mission by 2030 that will deliver cheaper bills, energy security and future jobs, which will drive growth in the Scottish economy.
Richard Ford.
Speaker, the rollout of offshore renewables in Scotland should happen alongside the growth of supply chains there. This is vital if the energy transition is to deliver jobs and investment in Scotland's oil and gas communities. It's welcome that the Government has allocated £200 million to a clean industry bonus, but that falls short of Labour's proposed £500 million pledged in the manifesto. How does the Government plan to strengthen the clean industry bonus to build thriving renewable manufacturing here in the UK?
Secretary of State.
Mr Speaker, it's a very good question from the honourable gentleman, because our clean power mission by 2030 is to make sure that we can deliver that clearly by government mission. GB Energy has been set up to look at supply chains and all the issues around how we deliver that, and I hope that GB Energy is able to look at some of these issues in the round. But the key thing here is to make sure we have the supply chain infrastructure to be able to deliver that mission.
Can members who are just roaming round the chamber remember there's other people and have a little more courtesy? Brian Leishman.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. If the Grangemouth refinery closes in 2025 and the recommendations of Project Willow aren't ready for years to come, then thousands of jobs will be lost. The very definition of an unjust transition. How can the Government possibly claim to have a credible industrial strategy for Scotland if they allow this to happen?
Secretary of State.
Mr Speaker, the closure of the Grangemouth refinery is regrettable. I think the honourable gentleman needs to reflect on the fact that the previous government and the current Scottish Government had 32 years combined to do something about Grangemouth and didn't lift a finger. Since we came into government in July, we've got a £100 million Falkirk and Grangemouth growth deal over the line. We've got some short-term help for the workers at Grangemouth. They continue to work with the company and the trade unions on the Grangemouth refinery, and we look forward to Project Willow coming to fruition this month, and the Government is fully committed to making sure we can see that through.
Yep. We come to Liberal Democrat spokesperson Christine Dardy.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And can I associate myself with the remarks of the Secretary of State, particularly about Denis Law, whom I had the pleasure of interviewing more than once in my previous career. I also welcome the Government's commitment to energy security as well as green energy and net zero. And I wondered, this week it's been reported that the Scottish Government is potentially going to fund up to £60 million both Minyang to build a wind turbine factory in the Highlands and Orient Cable to provide the undersea cables and connections for offshore wind. Given that these are both Chinese-owned companies, has the UK Government and the Secretary of State had any discussions with the Scottish Government to ensure that there are mitigating steps, such as ensuring local control and not using cellular modules? And have the security services been consulted?
Stay. No.
Mr Speaker, it's a key question which is one of the top agenda items that we always have with the Scottish Government in terms of how we deliver clean power by 2030, because obviously it's a joint endeavour. The Chancellor was in China last month, and we will work with China when it's in our national interest to do so. One of the key things, of course, is that GB Energy will be looking in the round at supply chains and also how we may deliver that mission by 2030. But she'll be as surprised as I am that the SNP voted against GB Energy and indeed voted against the record budget settlement in Scotland.
Tom Hayes.
Number 6, please, Mr Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Mr Speaker, GB Energy is owned by the public and headquartered in Aberdeen because Scotland will be at the forefront of the UK becoming the clean energy superpower that it wants to be by 2030. GB Energy's activities will support and enhance the delivery of priority supply chains and infrastructure development, helping to speed up the existing Scottish offshore wind pipeline and other clean energy projects.
Tom Hayes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. 8 years ago, Nicola Sturgeon promised a publicly owned energy company. But now, after spending £500,000 on consultants, the Scottish Government have dropped the plan. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that while Labour ploughs ahead with delivering GB Energy owned by the British people and headquartered in Scotland, it's the SNP that are breaking their promises, letting down Scotland, letting down our union and letting down protection of our planet?
Can I congratulate my honourable friend on being the new mission champion for clean energy, but he's absolutely right. While the SNP make promises they break, this Labour Government determines to deliver for Scotland, and maybe that's why SNP MPs in this House voted against GB Energy. We are delivering for Scotland, and we promised GB Energy, that's been delivered. We promised to end austerity, that's been delivered. We promised to make work pay, that's been delivered. While the SNP only deliver managed decline for Scotland, we are getting on with improving the economy.
Clear plans for Great British Energy, but there are very clear plans to end new licences for oil and gas in the North Sea. And Gary Smith of the GMB has said that stopping new licences is the employment equivalent of a Grangemouth refinery closing nearly every week from 2025 to 2030. So when is the Secretary of State going to stand up for Scotland, oppose the Right Honourable Member for Doncaster North, protect jobs and ensure we don't have more imports with higher emissions?
Mr Speaker, GB Energy is there with the National Wealth Fund to deliver that just transition and clean power by 2030. Oil and gas in the North Sea will be here for decades to come, and I would ask the honourable gentleman to work with us to deliver that just transition rather than scaremongering for the workers of the North East.
Secretary of State Andrew Bowie. Mr Speaker, despite mighty work by Conservative members of the other place, sadly the GB Energy Bill continues to make its progress through the House of Lords. The chairman of that company, to remind you, Mr Speaker, that's the chairman based in Manchester, leading a company headquartered in Aberdeen, in committee in the summer claimed GB Energy would directly employ 1,000 people. By November, that had fallen to 300 people. So, can he tell the House what is the figure, what are those jobs, where will they be based, and can he tell us once and for all what on earth GB Energy will actually do?
Mr Speaker, I'm surprised that the Shadow Secretary of State is championing the lines of the SNP. GB Energy is headquartered in Scotland. In fact, it's headquartered in his own region that he represents in Scotland, capitalised with £125 million, bringing valuable jobs to his own constituency. I suspect he might want to go back to his constituency this weekend and explain to his constituents why he doesn't want those new jobs and new industries of the future coming to his constituency.
Kirsty Blackman.
Question 7, please, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
With permission, Mr Speaker, I'll answer questions 7 and 9 together. The Labour Government's choice to protect the pensions triple lock means that millions of women pensioners will see their yearly pensions rise by up to £470 in April and by up to £1,900 over this Parliament. This is in stark contrast with the party opposite. They'd cut the state pension of over 1 million Scots. The Conservatives are still in chaos, announcing policies on the hoof that would mean a raid on pension pots. Meanwhile, this Labour Government is taking tough decisions and actions to clean up the Tories' economic mess.
Kirsty Blackman.
Does the Minister and indeed the Secretary of State agree with Labour MSPs in Scotland that WASPy women deserve compensation?
Mr Speaker, I do appreciate that campaigners are disappointed. However, the Honourable Lady, I'm afraid, has got herself in a bit of a fankle, and she's eliding two separate issues, a decision about the legality of the changes and the question of compensation. The Ombudsman's findings show evidence that the vast majority of WASPy women did know that the state pension age was changing. It therefore be difficult to justify up to £10 billion on a compensation scheme and conclude that that is a fair, proportionate or good value for money use of public funds.
Can I just say, will members please look at where the questions are coming from? It's disrespectful and it's totally not the way we should be carrying on. These are senior members who know better. He's a good example of a new member, Anne Davis.
Thank you, Mr Llefarydd. In 2021, the Secretary of State previously called for a vote of redress of 1950s women, urging UK Government to get on the front foot and offer serious compensation to those affected. 1950s-born women in Scotland and Wales have seen the same broken promises from Labour, with the now First Minister of Wales pledging in 2018 that a Labour government would right this justice. So with the Secretary of State, the Welsh First Minister and Labour politicians across the whole of these isles now turning their backs on 1950s women in Scotland, Wales and elsewhere, why should these women ever again believe a word they say?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, I'm afraid there's another honourable member who's in a bit of a fankle. The question about the legality of the changes has been settled by the courts. The question of compensation, which the Honourable Lady and her allies will have to answer, is why they think £10 billion, up to £10 billion of public money should be spent. Is this proportionate? Is it fair? Is it feasible? And is it value for money? The government's view is it is not.
Chris Kane.
Thank you. Does the Minister agree with me? Does the Minister agree with me that alongside the triple lock and pensions, the most important thing for women pensioners in Scotland is to fix our NHS, and that the SNP government needs to act urgently to ensure vulnerable Scots don't face what even the SNP Health Secretary says are unacceptable waits for treatment?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, I couldn't agree more. Scotland's NHS is in crisis. 1 in 6 Scots are on a waiting list. The UK Government has provided a record investment to fix Scotland's public services. The Scottish Government, led by the SNP, should get on with it.
Lord McNeill. The most common problem raised by women pensioners in East Hampshire to me is, like the member for Stirling says, the enormous waiting lists. And with researchers from Oxford University, Strathclyde University, Edinburgh University predicting that by the time the SNP leave office they'll be headed towards 1 million of Scots on waiting lists, how can we make sure that the billions provided in the Labour budget don't go down the same drain as everything else that is given to the SNP?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Scots today, 1 in 6 are on a waiting list. We face a housing emergency and a very stubborn attainment gap. Nobody could look round Scotland and say it is going in the right direction. That's the choice people will have to make at 2026. Is Scotland going in the right or wrong direction? Canny Scots, I'm sure, will make choices in the interests of their families and say that it's time to replace a failing SNP government.
Stephen Gethins.
And I welcome that welcome from the Labour benches. The Minister campaigned on compensation for WASPy women as the Secretary of State for Scotland did. So will she tell me, if she won't listen to the women, if she won't listen to the Ombudsman, will she listen to Scottish Labour MSPs who called for compensation?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, a third member in a dreadful fanco. What we said at the election was that we would wait the Ombudsman's report, we would examine it, and we would take a view. We have taken a view. We have taken a view that up to 10 billion of public money should not be spent providing compensation on a decision that was legal and which it has been concluded the vast majority of 1950 boards women were aware.
Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State recently reacted to Labour's dip in the polls in Scotland by saying the voters didn't like honesty. I wonder if it was more to do with Labour not keeping their commitment to women pensioners, or was it more to do with saying that you'd decrease fuel bills and they went up? Was it to do with saying you tackle child poverty and then take on some of the most regressive Tory policies on the two-child cap? And as we approach Burns Night, I wonder if the Bard was right when he said, "Dare to be honest and fear no Labour." Whereas nowadays I wonder if he'd say, "Dare to be honest and fear the voters."
Mr. Speaker, polls come, polls go. The fact remains this Labour Government has provided record investment for Scottish public services. I suggest the honourable member invest in a notepad so he can keep track.